Okay, then there's going to be a radical step two. Okay? See, when you invite jazz people in, it's like this is it. I'm the last jazz person that's coming in. Okay, so radical step two is that even the physical world, like the non-biological physical world, these desks and chairs, all the stones out there, and all that, like the glaciers, the mountains, the oceans, are manifestations of consciousness. So we're at a point now where, and this is really the point now, I'm looking around, and I was like, some of you are like really having fun with this. It's really a good point. I mean, serious fun. It's like we're at a point where there's like two worldviews, the materialist and the non-materialist, are coming together. It's going to hit in the academic world. See, the thing about the academic world is this. In terms of taking any field and going into detail, going into infinite detail, it's like, you know, every week in the sciences there's a new field, right? There's a sub-discipline, and then there's a new sub-discipline. It's like we're really, really good at going into detail. And then detail spawns new detail, okay? And there's a place for that. But in terms of putting that into this big picture, in terms of where the human being is at this point, and offering something that's useful to society, we're dropping the ball. And so what's happening now is that, and it's not only that, is the academy is terrified of big questions. And the academy is on a conspiracy. So I could really be in trouble now. But I figured it's like, as long as I'm in there, I'm not going to stop. I'm actually going to places I wouldn't have gone. So the academy in certain ways is corrupt in terms of the pursuit of knowledge, especially pursuit of knowledge that is paradigmatically inconvenient. And what I'm talking about is, I mean, they're probably like, okay, so what would be the most important thing? I'm on this national task force in music, because music is also a field that is deeply riddled with these tendencies. In my book, I have this thing called the Matrix of Materialism, which shows that, this is a little bit detour, but it's kind of a nice one. So improvisation was central in classical music. Music schools are all predicated on classical music, but improvisation is the enemy. Like if you're an improviser in the classical tradition today, you are a weirdo. If you were not an improviser 200 years ago in the classical tradition, you would be like a freak of nature. People would say, hey, they don't improvise, they just play music that's written out. It's like, what? No, that's impossible. So my whole thing is that, God, I love that topic too. I could just like go into that, but it is that music has inherited from the scientific materialist paradigm, which is not rooted in deep science. Okay, so we have to differentiate between the paradigm in the academic world and the actual scientific paradigm, which actually, up until very recently in the history of science, was deeply rooted in mystical and spiritual. I mean, even like Max Planck and the quantum people and Heisenberg and Einstein. Einstein was sort of a borderline period that they had deep spiritual conceptions of like this whole thing, you know. And now you have this wave of science that is, it's like, and you're being indoctrinated into it. That is a tiny sliver of the bigger picture. And you need to realize that and critically examine it and say, you know what? I don't buy what this guy is saying. I'm going to stick with the academic thing. That's your choice. Or you check it out. Okay, that's what that's in my view. That's what we're supposed to do. We throw at you different ideas and different thoughts, and then you kind of sort it out. Okay, how am I doing on the clock here? Am I? Okay, all right. So I'm going to try to wrap this up and open it up for questions. And I just want to tie this together. So what I'm talking about is that. Okay, we're at a moment where these two worldviews are coming together, and I think they're going to play out in the academic world, and it's going to be really exciting, and it's going to be turbulent. I mean, we are talking about serious explosions, And so this is where the art's coming in. You know, we're sort of sneaking in, and it's like very hip now to say, you know, if you're in the sciences, like, oh, I'm into the arts. You know, the arts is like really, they can shed light on our creativity and all this kind of stuff. Ooh, okay, get ready, my friends. So here is a principle that I think that I want you to check out, which I think is really it's really promising and is really inclusive, because really this is not about and I know you guys get this, but professional scientists as well as professional classical musicians have deep problems with this. This is not a war between spirituality and science. This is not a war between, say, the rest of the musical world and the classical musical world. This is if you want to say war, it's a war between a mutation of science in its deepest sense, and you could say spirituality in its deepest sense. And if you wanted to draw the parallel in classical music in its deepest sense, and the rest of the world's music in its deepest sense. So if we can transcend the academy, if we're majoring in science, or we're majoring in the arts, or we're majoring in, transcend the notion of our field that is being fed to us, we're going to hit this common ground that I started with, that is transcendent of category. And then what can we do? We can go into any realm of conventional academic practice with an expanded conception, and not only thrive and excel, we can actually emerge as leaders that say, hey, you're doing great work. Let's put it in this bigger picture. Okay, so this is an inclusive vision. It is not, even though I get worked up on it sometimes, it's not sort of like a call to arms that we need to, let's join in the fight. So I'm going to stop there, and let's open it up and see if there's some thoughts, reflections, objections. Those are always fun. Yes.
So I agree with sort of your idea of the bigger picture, but can you talk a little bit more about how you define consciousness and intelligence? You were talking about sort of this idea that consciousness drives the physical world, and that there might be some sort of consciousness of inanimate object. So how do you define a consciousness?
Okay, this is great. So, consciousness is self-awareness. If you look in Webster's, there's like a number of things. That's the first one. Consciousness is the act of being conscious. Now, in itself, this is profoundly unhelpful. It's like, come on, man. It's like, what is that? I agree. So, this thing is so big, and the question is so important, and the clock is moving so fast. All right, let's look at it this way. Okay, so how many, I'm assuming that a number of people came up in a kind of religious background, and maybe you still practice that religion, in which a basic tenet is that God created the universe. Okay, so if I asked, you don't have to raise your hands, if any group of 30 people, yeah, I mean, it's like God created the universe, okay? All right. So a consciousness-based approach to that premise is that in Indian philosophy is actually as a nice model. So they would say, yes, God created the universe. But they have different words, of course. So they would say Brahman. And Brahman, for them, is a universal infinite field of spirit. So now we're starting to see connections. So you can say that consciousness is kind of like self-awareness is in the biggest perspective. The self-awareness in the universe is the cosmic intelligence. So God, yeah, that's right, cosmic intelligence. Now, how does that relate to like this more localized? Because you probably weren't like asking for an answer on that level. That another aspect of I'm sort of going into religious correlates here. Like it's a little risky, but it's like I'm in it now. So here we are. Probably in your traditional religious upbringings, those of you that came up through that, there's also something that a correlation between the individual and the cosmos. Okay, so there is an individual, it's like say in the Bible, and I'm not a Christian, okay, but there's something like the kingdom of heaven is within you. Okay, so what does that mean? Oh, from a consciousness-based perspective, it means that this cosmic intelligence, the mechanics of the cosmos, how it creates itself, through this, and in Indian philosophy really spells it out. It creates the universe through this act of self-awareness. Cosmic intelligence, being aware of itself, creates energy, and this creates the physical world, and that that is within us. So, okay.
So, without a religious perspective,
Yeah.
how could you say that something like a chair has an awareness that would give it consciousness?
Okay.
Or would it be our awareness of the chair?
No, this is great. This is great. So you see, you're on this. This is great. It's that all of this is a premise. Okay, if all of creation is a manifestation of consciousness, that means the physical world is a manifestation of consciousness. It does not mean that the chair is necessarily self-aware, as human beings are, but that there is a kind of intelligence in the very nature of the atoms and the subatomic particles that make up that chair in every dimension of it. This philosophically, there's a philosophy called panpsychism that is this very thing, panpsychism. At UM Dearborn, one of the major books recently in the philosophy department is David Skirbina wrote this book called Panpsychism in the West. And the basic idea is that this philosophy it pervades Western thought, and is very consistent with Eastern thought, and that the physical world, like every facet of the physical world, has intelligence of a kind. And so this idea of inanimate, just barren, devoid of intelligence, the idea like those stones or something like that, would be antithetical to this idea. Check out panpsychism. Yeah. Wow. These are hard questions. It's like, this was not a great answer. I've heard worse, but I could probably do better if I was ready for this, and I was asking for trouble. So it's brilliant, brilliant. Yes?
So I just want to go back to the straightforward science that you were kind of talking about. So if science is moving forward kind of like an arrow, going like the detail by detail, really acute, small discoveries, versus this holistic view that you're kind of presenting right now. What's the motivation for the big guns of science to say, we need to change the way that we're approaching this if science is moving forward to them relatively? Like, what is the I guess the motivation to do that, to change what science is right now? Okay.
Well, I mean, science is the quest for understanding.
Right.
So that would be the motivation. And I think all scientists have had, are driven deep down on that motivation. Now, the problem is, and this happens in all fields, you start to get some chops in your field, and maybe you have some ideas published, and you're kind of you're getting acknowledged for your work and everything. You have a vested interest in your work, and that's based on a kind of worldview. And if something comes along and is threatening that worldview, it's not easy, And this is where a great book is Thomas Kuhn, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. Excellent book, and he goes into this. Basically, paradigm shifts in science. And what happens is that you have the majority of practitioners, and you have what he called anomalous phenomena come up. Like the reincarnation studies, these are anomalous phenomena. The majority of scientists, when they hear about it, they ridicule it. I mean, it's like, and this happens in every field. Definitely we have this in music. They make fun of it. They say, oh, can you believe that bullshit? It's like, can you believe somebody actually takes it serious? There'll be a small minority of scientists that have courage and realize that there's something there and there's an intuition happening, and they actually take it seriously. The anomalous findings grow to a point where the mainstream science, the mainstream circles, there comes a point where the wave is so high that you realize that you can't ignore it. And so this is the motivation. Sometimes it's like, it's driven by the quest for understanding that hopefully will transcend personal comfort zone, but it doesn't, except for there's a few innovators that will actually, and then of course they're on top. Now I want to add, I can add one little thing to this question here, and there's some other hands up. Now in quantum, okay, this is like, I'm going to give you like a very generalized account of a ramification of quantum mechanics, which is beginning in, say, the 30s or 40s, starts to delve into the subatomic world and found that subatomic behavior of particles, electrons, and even smaller, deviated from what happens at classical scales. So at classical scales, you can take this chair and you can measure the location of this chair or any kind of particle you could hold in your hand, a baseball. You could actually identify the position of it and the velocity. At the quantum scale, and this shattered the foundations of physicalist science, it was revealed that you cannot, subatomic phenomena are indeterminate. You can't study the position or the velocity. You can choose one, and what you study is dependent on the position of the observer. So all of a sudden, subjectivity is an important part of scientific inquiry, whereas the whole scientific method is predicated on what? The exclusion of subjectivity, so we have objectivity. And for a lot of creation and a lot of stuff, it's like it really, really works. But for an important part of creation, which is like the underpinnings of the physical world, it doesn't work. Now, some of the things that have boggled physicists have been, those split, what do they call the double slit experience, where they actually will have, they're able to set up these situations where electrons will be shot out and they'll be in a particle divider. And yet somehow there is intelligence. This is the thing. There is intelligence between the electrons, no matter at what distance they are, the electron pairs, at what distance they are from each other in terms of spin type and that kind of thing. And so in a universe that is devoid of intelligence, this does not work. So this is something else to check out in your panpsychism explorations. Also, some of the ramifications of quantum mechanics that actually are. And there's I'm part of a group called the Society for Consciousness Studies, and there's a number of physicists that are really taking this to the most radical conclusions that I've sort of pointed to here today. So what you need to do is check out, definitely get the mainstream take on some of these ideas. Talk to some of your favorite professors, and hopefully, hopefully they won't like cut me to shreds too much. But then it's up to you. You got to check out the people on the edges because they're not necessarily easy to find. We had a couple of other questions here.
I'm a cognitive scientist, so I really like what you say about neuroscience. So we have this idea in cognitive science that our brains are computers programmed by our experience. Now, would you say the human consciousness is part of the human experience, or is it in the computer already?
Okay, so it's both. Our consciousness is shaped by our experience, but I would also say that the consciousness is actually it precedes that experience too. So it's like a two-way thing, and probably in cognitive they would not be wild about a lot of this. Even they may be happy about some of the remarks about neuroscience, but your field would not be wild about sort of broader things that I'm talking about here. But then you're one of the, you could be one of the pioneers, because there's definitely, yeah.
You were talking early on about the involvement of meditation in classes, especially beginning at this university. What I was wondering was how exactly the meditation was developing learning of or improvisation of music or other fields.
That's a great question. So meditation is a means by which our conscious awareness starts to go deeper into, penetrate to deeper levels of itself, in a way. A good way of thinking about it is the wave in relationship to the ocean. So the wave is like our ordinary consciousness mind, our ordinary mind is like very turbulent. It's like, especially on a windy day. And it's like full of chatter and thoughts and anxieties and expectations and all this kind of thing. And when you're in school, you're studying, so you've got like tons of information. That's the surface of the ocean. But anybody that's done any kind of scuba diving, you don't have to go far. And what happens? It's like really, really still. In human consciousness, it has an absolute still point. And meditation is a way from going from the surface into the still point. And at the still point, and it's like, I've never done scuba diving, but I've seen it on TV, It's like, when you're swimming at the surface, you have to like really, you have to pump, But when you go down, you're just down there and you're just like a little tiny flick of the flipper. And it's like, you go for it because it's just, so meditation is a way of accessing a profoundly still and clear and wakeful. Means, and the body becomes incredibly relaxed. So here's so sometimes you say, well, what's the difference between that and sleep? Because our body is still and the mind seems still unless we're dreaming. Okay, and they're worlds apart. In meditation, there's different kinds of meditation, but this is generally a general aspect. There's an experience of what's called pure consciousness, in which we're contacting, the mind is actually contacting a level of awareness that is devoid of thought, devoid of thinking, yet exquisitely awake at the same time. So there's two things that seem paradoxical from ordinary consciousness. Devoid of thinking, I'm just asleep. I'm in a coma. Nope. Because when you're in a coma and when you're sleeping, you are not profoundly awake. And I'm talking about a level of wakefulness that is like explosively radiant and so much more wakeful. Like right now, those of you, in fact, nobody's sleeping. This is amazing. Very good, thank you. Okay, so everyone's kind of awake right now. Laughing is kind of like everyone, all right? All right. The kind of wakefulness that you can experience in meditation that is devoid of mental activity is like way beyond this. So you have two things that it's like, and it's exquisite. I mean, you talk about a level of happiness, a level of just absolute bliss and fulfillment, and this is profound creativity inducing. You go into this on a regular basis, it starts to inform your creative activity in your field and your interpersonal relationships. And this is like cognitive psychology. This is the next. See, the thing is, this is why we need pioneers to say cognition. There's like, where does that come from? We need to transcend cognition. This experience of pure consciousness does that. Now, there's another thing that I want to mention in terms of, and this connects to what I was saying before. There's an interesting body of findings. This also challenges the materialist platform on group meditation study projects. There was one very notable one in the 90s in Washington, D.C. Now, Washington, D.C. is a very crime-ridden city, as most people know, especially in the summer. And there were the organizers of this project had this theory that if a large numbers of meditators would come together for a certain period of time, that they actually could radiate harmony by contacting this. It's like the depths of the ocean. Everyone is connected to this ocean. So if you have like several thousand people coming together to go to the depths of the ocean, that this is the theory that this wave of consciousness to which everyone is connected would be enlivened, and it would actually have a harmonizing influence in the environment. So talk about bold. So this is good. So there's different lessons in here. All right, for those of you who are like some of you are like really, I am a pioneer. I'm going to do something like this. So they went to the police. They went to the authorities. They say, this probably sounds a little wild, but we think in the next 3 weeks we're going to have 3,000 or 4,000. I think it was 4,000 people come, and they're going to do this meditation practice for 6, 7, 8 hours a day, and they're going to do it together. And we think that the crime rate is going to go down. in DC. And we think there was several main, there was like maybe eight or nine things, but the things I remember, and this was published in a journal, crime rate, accident rate, and illness rate during that time. And the authorities say, okay, but we'll monitor it. The police and the medical, we'll monitor it. This doesn't take much. And so, lo and behold, they had the project. You have the baseline parameters, crime as usual and all that. And then 28 or 30% reduction during that three-week period in all those. Less accidents, less crime, less illness, admissions to hospital. And then after the people went back, because they came from all over the world, they went back to their homes, there was a little bit of a residual effect of decrease in those, but it kind of went back to normal numbers. And so there's been a number of these things. I mean, this is the kind of experiment that I think is, some have even surmised that this is going to be like a major antidote to terrorism. Because what you're doing is you're actually diffusing that backdrop of hostility and hatred and all these other kinds of things from which terrorist acts, which are almost impossible, as we know, almost impossible really to combat on any other way, really, when it comes down to it, So the thing I would say here, there's a couple of things I would say. This is an example of whether you buy it or not, okay? Paradigmatically different thinking. Paradigm meaning that, okay, one approach to terrorism is that we just have more and more, like it's like we go in and bomb the terrorists, okay? All right, I'm trying to stay out of politics here, but you know what I'm saying. Okay, so going in and bombing the terrorists, okay, it's kind of like, that's not paradigmatically different. Okay, that's basically entering on it. And I'm not saying there's not a place for that, okay. But what I'm talking about is paradigmatically, it's like a whole different premise. You're enlivening this field of consciousness to which everyone, the terrorists and us, are connected, and enlivening its inherently creative and harmonizing aspects. So the thing I would say is just use this as an example, whether you agree it or not, with it or not, as paradigmatically different examples. Now the other thing is, be vigilant about this, because you're going to run into it on a day-to-day basis, or maybe you're going to be the pioneer. So when the organizers of the researchers on this meditation project went to the Journal of Conflict Resolution, which is out of Yale University. So it's a top journal devoted to conflict resolution. It's like different kinds of conflict, And so this is, violence is a kind of conflict. And they said, we have these studies. We conducted this experiment. And so the editors of the journal is very interesting, because this is a great study in what happens when Thomas Kuhn said normal science. It's kind of like people that are basically going with status quo science. They looked at the study. It was impeccable in terms of the scientific methodology, the mathematical analysis, all this stuff. It was impeccable, but it defied their worldview. And so you have this one, it was published with, at first the reviewers said, well, we can't argue with, we can't publish it because it's like, it can't be true. So we can't publish it, even though it met with all of the other parameters. And the editor, to his credit, goes, yeah, we can't publish this. But he's kind of like, he went on a long walk and he said, how can we not publish it? On bias? So this is really hip. And he went back and it's like, we're publishing it. And they published it with like a disclaimer, it's kind of, but the point here is that I want to say is that it's not, there's two things. The ramifications of this kind of study for where humanity is at right now, staggering. And there's even some thinkers that are actually surmising that if it's true that consciousness is primary, consciousness is interactive with the physical world, that something like this could actually impact climate, weather and climate. Again, put this in your category of, oh my God, it's a paradigmatically different approach. Like right now, climate change. Right? It's like, what are we doing? Who's got an optimistic picture? If we stopped emitting the CFCs or whatever they are right now, we would not even notice a difference for at least 75 years if we stopped emitting the stuff in the atmosphere right now. It's like, whoa. Okay? So my point is this. We're at a point where we need to be open to radically different, paradigmatically different solutions. And where can this thinking happen? It's got to happen in the academy. Where is it happening now? It's not happening in the academy. Why is it not happening? Because we are poor improvisers. The jazz is very weak in the academy because the improvising artist is kind of like, is in that space where, taps into the space and is kind of like, transcends judgment and bias and like is able to discriminate in a way, discern. It's like, and examine his or her own tendencies and go deep and make something happen. So the last chapter of my book is called Planet Earth Takes a Solo. And basically the idea is that humanity, if we're going to survive, we need to function. There's how big is the improvising ensemble that we call humanity has how many players in it? A little bit bigger than a jazz trio, right? It has like 7.2 billion, okay? It's a big ensemble, okay? Needs to function just like a small improvising trio in which the members are like in each moment and they're going deep into their own consciousness and coming up with creative solutions. Even if these creative solutions are radically different than the norm. Okay, so do we have a second?
So we have a few more minutes left, but for the last part of this lecture, I want you to maybe talk about how your interest and your understanding of consciousness has impacted your practice as a musician, and how the program that you run in the School of Music, how that impacts the students and their performance. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's great. So, and this relates to the meditation question that you asked that, right? Yeah. Okay, so for me, there's an interplay, and this is great. Like the thing about jazz, everyone knows, most people know, jazz is very improvisatory, and the skill level is just it's very high. That's required. But there's another interesting thing about the jazz tradition is that the major jazz icons and contemporary practitioners are even more in this direction, were really engaged in meditation practice, like John Coltrane and Herbie Hancock, Wayne Shorter, all these people, Sonny Rollins. They were deeply engaged in meditation practice. And so what I develop in my book is that there's an interplay between what I call parts to whole engagement and whole to parts. So the parts to whole is this improvisatory engagement in which we go from the surface of the ocean and all that turbulence, and we go deep into sort of the foundations of consciousness, in which that it's like the source of the waves. And then meditation does what? Meditation takes us from the silent depths, and then enables us to engage in turbulence. This is the thing about meditation, is that I left this out. The thing about meditation